Hey guys, welcome to Kerbal Space Program with Nitro. Well, in this video, I guess you can call this sort of a tutorial slash showcase. I wanted to show you guys my new method of launching basically any size payload you want into space without making a super complex launch stage. So this is basically a one-size-fits-all launch stage, and I'm also using my new technology for engine refits on whatever you want to do for your craft. So right here, just as an example, I built this kind of a really basic lander with landing legs and engines and everything, parachutes, but we're not going to use any of that. But this is just to show you like a basic craft attached to it with a rather large fuel tank actually. And if you do decide to use a craft similar to this, this is really efficient. You can land on the moon and make it back to Kerban just fine. It's really a good basic lander design. But on the bottom here, we have a decoupler node attached to the bottom part here. Now these landing legs will allow enough clearance for the bottom and the engine so that way they don't hit the ground. But below that we have a large size decoupler attached to our fuel tanks. Now the whole idea is that you use air-powered jet engines with ram air intake and the radial intakes as well to reach the maximum altitude you can, which is about 20,000 to 22,000 meters. And then you jettison all of these jet engines and then fire all of these rockets at the same time. And in this way, you don't have to use asparagus staging or any complex launch stages of boosters or anything. This is all you need. Because if you think about it, really all that fuel is doing for you on your launch stage is getting you up through the thick atmosphere of Kerban. Once you're in space, you don't need all that weight anymore, and you're ejecting it as you go anyways. So really, the asparagus staging is kind of inefficient. And it takes a long time to build, so if you build a rocket this way, you're going to save time, save effort, and this will work every single time. And as long as you have enough jet engines on here for this thing to get off the ground, it's going to keep going. So you don't have to worry about your thrust weight ratio really as much, because this will always work. And you don't even have to use the super powered turbojet engines either. You can use these ones that work at sea level, and these work perfectly. They get you to the same altitude as these ones do before the flame out threshold anyways, so it doesn't matter which ones you use, but these are more powerful for getting off the ground, and these are not. So always go with these basic jet engines here. They're going to get your craft up off the ground a lot easier than if you have the other ones attached to it. And really, this is all the fuel you need. With asparagus staging, you have to use huge fuel tanks, usually multiples of these things or larger. And with this method, you only have to use this little itty bitty 45 liquid fuel capacity. And up here, I have the regular jet engine fuel tanks, because if you attach the ram air intake directly to the decoupler, what winds up happening is it'll siphon fuel from this tank instead, even if you have fuel already attached to it, for some stupid reason. So I think it's just because whenever you attach an engine like this to anything, it siphons fuel from the nearest fuel tank, and I guess that just happens to be that one. Not really sure why that works that way, but just keep that in mind. You might notice fuel not depleting properly, so always check which fuel tank you're getting fuel depletion from, but this one right here works fine. On the bottom, I used a quad stack on the bottom so I could have 4 of these jet engines on the bottom there. And really, you don't even need this much fuel. You could get by with these tiny little fuel pods, the little donuts, and that would have enough fuel to get you up through Kerban's atmosphere with these kinds of engines. And that is extremely lightweight, so you're cutting down on all that weight, all that mass, because basically with the asparagus staging method and the booster method, you're using fuel to lift more fuel into space, and it's really not that efficient if you think about it like that. So what happens here is after you get this thing all the way up and you fire all these engines, this has this stage attached to the decoupler, its job is only to get the craft into your perfect orbit with your perfect inclination. Once you've done that, you eject this pod by just decoupling the node, and since there isn't another large decoupler attached to this one, it's not going to siphon fuel from this other tank because it considers this to be one separate system that cannot have fuel transfer from the decoupler, which is kind of annoying if you've ever had that happen where you have a decoupler on a decoupler and it takes fuel from a tank it's not supposed to. Well, with this, you won't have that problem. And it's all structurally sound. You really don't have to do a whole lot to strut this thing together. It's overall really stable, and you won't have any overheating problems, and it works every time. And now with the new sub-assemblies, you can actually save the sub-assembly here by just detaching this whole part underneath it and saving it, and I already did that. I have an airlift, and I also have an Atlas 2 lift stage. So you can launch huge payloads up through the air. I launched my entire base up through the air. I launched my refuel stations. So once you actually get this thing to orbit, what you'll probably want to wind up doing is fitting it with some engines. And when I launched my base into orbit and then got it over to Duna, I used this refit engine design right here. So here's the refit engine. Uses the same design method, only double the amount of jet engines. But it's the same exact kind of transfer stage, and it launches this entire engine up into orbit, and you have RCS on this unmanned engine, and you dock it to your large docking port. So anything with a docking port, you can just launch up your engines and refit it with any sized engine you want. If you don't want to use the gray ones, just remember that if you launch up 2, it's the exact same length and exact same fuel capacity as one of these large orange ones. So it's easier if you just do them in parts. You can always attach a large decoupler here and then use the same method that I used on the Atlas 3 to just attach a tank to another tank and just stack them that way. So here I'm going to show you the craft in action. We're actually going to launch it. You fire up all of the engines at the same time on the launch pad, and then you're going to release the launch clamps after the engines are all at maximum power, and that'll allow you to launch up. So make sure that your launch clamps are actually your second stage and not on your first stage, otherwise this thing will drop to the ground, it might explode, it might float a little bit, you never know. And then on your next stage you want to make sure that all these decouplers decouple at the exact same time that you fire these engines. That way you don't have to mess with engine cutoff or any action groups for anything like that, because it'll blow all the engines on the bottom free, and these ones on the top will basically banana peel and they'll fly away in the opposite direction of where this other ship is going, so you don't have to worry about any collisions or anything exploding or anything like that. And that's as long as these aren't strutted together, so never strut the outer jet engines together, otherwise they probably will crash and explode. And then after you fire all that, you'll just see me decouple it, and then this thing will be in space and it's ready to go. So here's the demonstration. I'll go ahead and make it a daytime launch. And take a screenshot for posting purposes. Alright, here we go. Alright, so what I did is after you eject all of the jet engines, then you angle your craft to 45 degrees on your nav ball to do your gravity turn, and you don't have to do it early because you're not in the atmosphere. You're out of all the thick atmosphere, and so you're getting the maximum power out of all these engines because you're not wasting fuel trying to push through all that atmosphere. And so after you achieve your apoapsis and it gets over 70,000 meters, then of course you turn all the way down here to the 90-degree mark, and then you can keep it to this minus 10-degree mark to control the height of the apoapsis and still move your arc out. And then I usually like to get it around 80,000. And then once we get to this 80,000 meter apoapsis, you do the rest of your burn and achieve your orbit. And so here we have achieved orbit, and we have 79,000. So if we want to make this perfect here, we can go ahead and move that marker over to 80,000, and then move our navigation ball over to retrograde, and then of course burn to establish our circularized orbit. And you can fine-tune that as much as you want. You have plenty of fuel to get the job done. Remember, we still have fuel in all of these tanks as well as the large ones, so if you don't want to use the fuel from the rest of these, you always have the option of transferring it out here. If you are a fan of asparagus staging and you don't really like burning all these engines like this, you can always asparagus stage these and jettison them as you feel, and you can probably get a lot more efficiency out of it that way, but I just prefer this method because I can burn all the engines. They all have an equalized amount of fuel, which means that even though I have a larger engine here, it'll burn out at the exact same time that all these smaller ones burn out. So I'm getting maximum power for the fuel out of all of this. And so once we have orbit here, what you're going to do is simply decouple your node, and this piece will drift away as debris. And now we have this stage as our main craft, so I can knock it away there. And now you would just launch up your engine or any parts that you want to attach to it, attach it here. After you reach your destination and you no longer need this stage and you're ready for an actual landing, then you jettison the stage with the docking clamp here, which is your next stage that I have set up, activating your landing like so. And now you have your lander craft in space, and we have a lot of fuel. You're actually getting more fuel with these radial engines than you will out of the 220 liquid fuel large engine that you can put on the bottom of here. And so this is overall really efficient, and now if we wanted to deorbit it, we can. And as you can see, we still have plenty more fuel remaining if we wanted to. This craft is lightweight, so it has a lot of power with the thrust to weight ratio of these engines on here, and we have a lot of fuel to work with. So we didn't even use half of our fuel doing that burn, and we already have a really good deorbital burn. And I'll just skip ahead here and actually do a re-entry. Now, ideally, also, if you wanted to keep your craft with your other part in space or your engines in space, you can always refuel it by adding another docking port up here on the top instead of having the parachute there. So you don't necessarily have to do what I did and actually jettison your engines if you don't want to. You can have a permanent craft in space at all times with that setup and always be able to refuel it by launching your refueling stage up there using the exact same method. And so there you go, we've already re-entered the atmosphere. We're actually going to land on the land, which is always good. And that is the demonstration of my Atlas 3 launch vehicle with an airlift launch stage and orbital burn engine. So I hope you guys enjoyed and found this video helpful, and hopefully you'll be able to build craft of any size and be able to get them in orbit relatively easily with that method. Building a lighter weight craft, I was actually able to get a small pod with a Kerbal out of the entire Kerban solar system, so it can be done very easily without a large elaborate ship. And so there you go, perfect landing back on Kerban. Again, I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you like what you see, go ahead and subscribe for more videos to come in the future. And the download link, of course, for this ship is in the descriptions, as well as the refit engine that I used. It's all on the Google Drive. Just search for the Atlas 3 and the refit engine, and you'll be all set and ready to go, as well as my other vehicles that I've used from my other videos. So hope you liked it, and take care.